Hong Kong's high daily expenses and housing prices are no longer surprising headlines. As one of the most expensive cities around the globe, the wealth gap, land use crisis, and many other factors have resulted in a vast housing inequality issue. In this unit, we have learned to unravel this issue through the approaches of economics, geography, history, and psychology. And now I have decided to move further, viewing this issue on a local scale. Using both the primary and secondary research conducted by our class targeting the Tsing Yi area of Hong Kong, in this video I will be focusing on two of the approaches: geographically, the government interventions, and economically, housing affordability, aiming to investigate how they affect each other in the context of Tsing Yi's housing inequality issue. So, to what extent do government interventions in Tsing Yi help resolve housing affordability issues? When evaluating this question, we will first need to take a deeper view of the two approaches and define my two key variables. In this video, the critical government interventions I will be focusing on are the scheme and public housing in Tsing Yi developed during the past decades, as shown in the table, including 17 estate and more than 40,000 units. Being one of the critical solutions to the housing inequality issue in Hong Kong, according to the Housing Department, public and scheme housing is a set of mass housing programs. Through applications, lower income residents can get affordable housing where the rent and prices are significantly lower than those for private housing and are heavily subsidized by the government. To evaluate its impact, I will use the knowledge from the geographic perspective, considering the spacing, capacity, and all different geographic factors in the specific region, such as the number of people getting help in Tsing Yi, etc., while comparing it with the other district to get a general image of its usage. Then, I'll further these data trends to contrast with the housing affordability issue in Tsing Yi. This is deeply connected to the core of housing inequality, as the higher the affordability, the more equal people's chance to get decent housing. As an economic approach, according to Professor David at Virginia Tech, the term housing affordability broadly refers to the cost of housing services and its relationship with household incomes. Therefore, when evaluating it, I will compare and contrast the average household income with the average price for people to rent a house in Tsing Yi to work out their ratio. By reviewing this ratio with the other district, we can see Tsing Yi's relative position in terms of Hong Kong, having a higher or lower affordability, thus suggesting a positive or negative impact created by the scheme and public housing. Through this, finally, we can see the result from both variables to recognize the correlation and perhaps causation between them to determine how significant scheme and public housing help to resolve the housing affordability issues, and highlight how it influences the greater image of housing inequality, and hopefully provide a positive action to move forward, resolving this issue in Hong Kong as a whole. So what does the data tell us? First, we will be viewing the impact of public and scheme housing. As stated through this table, we can see that in Tsing Yi there's a total of 17 estates, which consists of 42,961 units. But how significant is this number? By comparing with the other districts, including 2 districts from Kowloon, Yaoqing, Kowloon City, and 3 districts from Hong Kong Island, Wan Chai Central and Western, and Southern, we can clearly see that the number of public and scheme housing in Tsing Yi is significantly exceeding the others. For instance, 7 more estates compared to Kowloon City and 16 more estates compared to Wan Chai. When looking at the number of units, the difference is even greater, as there are 7,800 more units in Tsing Yi compared to the second highest district, Southern. Considering that Tsing Yi is not even a district, but an island under Kwai-Tsing, with a smaller area compared to the other district but more scheme and public housing units and estates in the meantime, this suggests that the distribution of public and scheme housing is highly dense in this specific area. In fact, according to the 2016 population by census conducted by the Hong Kong government, the total number of citizens in Tsing Yi was only 184,167, and according to Hong Kong's Information Service Department, the average householder living in a unit of public housing is now 2.8. By doing some simple calculations, the 42,961 units would provide 120,291 people a decent housing environment, which is almost 2/3 of the whole Tsing Yi population. Taking into consideration the fact that the rents and prices of public and scheme housing are significantly lower than those for private housing, according to Mr. Victor from South China Morning Post, less than 2,500 Hong Kong dollar per month, which is lower than the average rental price of more than 10,000 Hong Kong dollars. A hypothesis can be drawn. The average rent sale should be at a comparatively low point, and therefore the housing affordability should be at a relatively high level. Then we will see if this hypothesis is correct by examining the ratio between the median domestic household income and the median monthly rent by small TPU of Tsing Yi ArcGIS. For example, in the case of TPU 350, we will use 1,300 to divide 27,490, which would give us 4.7% as the rent to income ratio. Since there are only 2 small TPUs in Tsing Yi, in order to collect sufficient data and build a greater overview of Hong Kong's real estate market, I have also selected 2 TPUs from the district we discussed earlier, and calculated their rent-to-income ratio. As the HUD, United States Department of Housing and Urban Development stated, a severe rent burden is defined as paying more than 50% of one's income on rent, and cost-burdened families are those who pay more than 30% of their income for housing, so that they may have difficulty in affording necessities such as food, clothing, transportation, and medical care. By comparing them, we can see that while all other TPU's rent-to-income ratios have exceeded the 30% line, and Kowloon City and Southern TPU2 have even been identified as severe rent burdens as they pass the 50% line, the ratio for Tsing Yi's TPUs remains single digits, 4.7 and 5.2%, which is drastically lower than the rent burden line by more than 20%, showing that the affordability is very high. This has also been proved by Tsing's price per square foot ratio. According to Numbeo, the price per square foot ratio to buy an apartment outside of the city center is 16,679 Hong Kong dollars. However, Tsing's housing price per square foot is only 15,158 according to Centerline Property, showing that not only is the rental price low, so is the buying price. Therefore, as the lower price to rent or buy housing increases the affordability, my hypothesis has been clearly supported, implying that the public and scheme housing in Tsing Yi does improve the housing affordability issue due to the wide distribution. However, does it mean that the public and scheme housing resolves the issue of affordability fully and there are no downsides behind it? Soon, a key downside was shown. As the Hong Kong Housing Department stated, at the end of September 2020, the average waiting time for general applicants to obtain public housing was 5.6 years. Even for elderly one-person applicants, it will still take them 3.3 years. Though the combination of the scheme and public housing helps resolve this issue to an extent, as there are multiple programs for citizens to apply with fewer restrictions. For example, according to the Hong Kong Housing Society, the sandwich scheme housing can also be applied by eligible middle-income families. Due to the massive number of applicants, there are still many people who can't get the help they needed. What about their affordability? Thus, I went back to the Centerline Property and searched for the money people needed to rent a private apartment in Tsing Yi. The number is incredibly high, as the lowest available rental price is 9,900 Hong Kong dollars, which is already more than 30% of the median household income and almost 10 times the median monthly rent in Tsing Yi. In addition to that, the corresponding size of the room is only 217 square feet, about the same size as a standard parking lot, suggesting that the affordability is incredibly low, which is also shown through the survey our class conducted in Tsing Yi, as 100% of the respondents do not consider their housing affordable, and some even stated, "For our monthly salaries, we do not have much left after paying rent, the kids' tutoring, utility bills, and other living expenses. We do not have much savings and cannot afford to buy an apartment," suggesting their low affordability even further. This point has then been forwarded when looking at the recreational facilities, shopping malls, and public transportation in Tsing Yi. Nearly all of them are located in the northeast corner of Tsing Yi, with all the scheme and public housing and most of Tsing Yi's population. Though for people living there, it's a huge benefit. However, for people living in the other areas of Tsing Yi who are still in the 5.6 years queue, this could potentially be an issue that lowers their affordability, as now they need to pay additional fees on transportation to access these resources and less money to spend on rent. So although public and scheme housing help resolve the housing affordability issue in Tsing Yi, there are still people suffering due to housing inequality and low affordability. For them, their only option is to live in these tiny apartments, simply coffin houses. And from these two images, we can see a clear difference. The environment of the scheme and public housing is just significantly better, allowing room for movement, while the coffin houses remains cramped and narrow. In the eye of the famous YouTuber vlogs, we can peek into these people's lives, and their living standard is incredibly low.
因為每個人生活習慣唔一樣咯，成日都因為好少個事都會有摩擦咯，唔 OK 咯，即係好多嘈交咯。
Though the portion of these people in Tsing Yi's population is minor, they shouldn't be ignored, and the waiting time for public housing needs to be cut short. Finally, it's time to wrap up. Through this video, my aim has been reached, as a strong interconnection between my two variables has been demonstrated. Though more variables can be discussed, we can still recognize that public and scheme housing in Tsing Yi has resolved the issue of housing affordability to a great extent, while benefiting the housing inequality issue at the same time. Meanwhile, the downside has also suggested that reducing the wait time of public and scheme housing is now a critical action when trying to resolve Hong Kong's housing inequality issue. To that end, more public and scheme housing should be constructed in order to further pursue housing equality as a whole. Thank you.